The first sign that something was wrong was how quiet the room became when I walked in. Not silent, just measured. Conversations lowered slightly, like people were deciding whether or not I was relevant enough to keep talking through. I arrived a few minutes after the event had already started. Nothing dramatic about it. No rush, no apology. I checked in, took the badge I was handed, and scanned the room once before stepping inside. The place was full, well-dressed, polished. Everyone looked like they belonged there. Everyone except me. I could feel it almost immediately, that subtle hesitation people get when they don't know where to place you. I wasn't ignored exactly. I was assessed, measured, then quietly filed into a category I hadn't chosen. I didn't look impressive. I didn't look unprofessional either, just ordinary. And in a room built on perception, ordinary might as well have been invisible. I stood near the back at first, pretending to read the program. That's when I heard it. A soft laugh, not cruel, casual. Someone said something about me not fitting the dress code. Another voice responded that maybe I was part of the technical crew. The tone wasn't hostile. That almost made it worse. I glanced in their direction. They didn't stop talking. No one apologized. So I did the simplest thing. I walked past them and sat down in the only empty seat I could find, a chair near the side, slightly behind the main rows, the kind of seat people leave empty on purpose. I placed the program on my lap and looked forward. What they didn't know, what no one in that room knew yet, was that I wasn't early or late. I was exactly on time. The event itself was formal, structured. Speakers rotated on schedule, slides moved when they were supposed to, applause came on cue. It was the kind of gathering where everyone wanted to be seen agreeing with the right people. As the first speaker talked about growth and vision, I listened carefully, not just to the words, but to what was missing. I'd already noticed a few inconsistencies, small ones, but important. That was normal. What wasn't normal was how often people glanced back at me. Not openly, just enough to confirm their earlier judgment. At some point, someone leaned over the aisle and whispered something else. I didn't hear the words, but I heard the laughter that followed. I didn't react. I've learned that when people think they've figured you out, correcting them too early only makes things messy. Halfway through the program, the moderator opened the floor for comments. He asked if any key contributors wanted to add context to what had been presented so far. There was a pause. Then someone behind me said, louder than necessary, that maybe they should check if the guest section had any thoughts. That time, more people laughed. Still, no one looked at me directly. I kept my eyes forward. The moderator smiled politely and moved on. The next speaker took the stage and began outlining next phase projections. This was where things got interesting. I recognized the framework immediately, the structure, the language, even the order of the points. It was mine. Not copied exactly, adjusted, condensed, repackaged, but undeniably based on the model I had submitted weeks earlier. No credit was given. That wasn't surprising. What surprised me was how poorly it was being explained. Important qualifiers were missing, dependencies were glossed over, assumptions were being treated as guarantees. I made a mental note of every issue. When the presentation ended, applause filled the room, confident, certain. The moderator stepped back up and thanked the speaker, then hesitated slightly before continuing. He cleared his throat and said they needed clarification on one section before moving forward. Apparently, a key recommendation had come from an external contributor who hadn't been present during the planning sessions. He scanned the room. Then he asked a simple question. He asked if the person who authored the original framework was present. For a moment, no one moved. Then I raised my hand. Not dramatically, not high, just enough. The silence that followed was immediate and complete. I could feel heads turning before I saw them. Chairs shifted. Someone dropped a pen. The moderator froze mid-motion. He stared at me for a second longer than necessary, then said my name, carefully, like he was testing it. I nodded. The room changed instantly. Not loudly, not emotionally, but structurally. The assumptions collapsed all at once. The moderator apologized for the confusion and invited me to join him at the front. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and walked forward without saying a word. As I passed the rows, people avoided my eyes. The ones who had laughed earlier suddenly found something very interesting on their laps. At the front, the moderator handed me the microphone. His voice was quieter now, respectful. He asked if I could clarify the intent behind the framework and address a few concerns that had come up. I didn't take the microphone. I corrected one misunderstanding, then another, briefly, precisely. I didn't lecture. I didn't justify myself. I explained what needed to be explained and stopped. The room listened, not because I demanded attention, because they needed it. When I finished, the moderator thanked me again and suggested they take a short break before continuing. People stood up slowly, conversations restarted, but differently now. Several people approached me, not aggressively, not confidently, carefully. They asked questions, real ones, about implementation, about risk, about what I would recommend adjusting. I answered what mattered and deflected what didn't. One person tried to joke about the earlier misunderstanding. I let it pass without responding. The break ended. The second half of the event felt nothing like the first. My seat was no longer at the side. Someone had already moved it closer to the front. I didn't comment on that either. As discussions resumed, people referenced my comments directly. They waited for confirmation before moving on. The framework was revised in real time. Near the end, the moderator announced a follow-up session would be scheduled with a smaller group to refine next steps. He looked at me when he said it. When the event finally ended, I gathered my things and headed toward the exit. That's when someone called my name. I turned to see the moderator walking quickly toward me, no longer on stage, no longer performing. He thanked me, genuinely this time, and admitted that my contribution had been underestimated early on. He said decisions had already been made based on my clarification. He asked if I'd be willing to stay involved. I told him I'd think about it. Outside, the night air felt calm. Behind me, the building still buzzed with conversation, but it no longer mattered. A few days later, the email started. Polite, direct, purposeful. Updated documents, requests for review, invitations to smaller meetings. When I joined the next session, everything was different. Introductions were thorough, seats were prepared. No one joked. The same people who had laughed now listened carefully, not out of fear, out of recognition. No one ever apologized for that first night. They didn't need to. Their behavior had already done that for them. By the time the project moved forward, roles were clearly defined. Authority wasn't debated. It was assumed, correctly. And when I eventually stepped away, quietly, without announcement, nothing collapsed, because the work had already spoken, long before I ever did. After the follow-up meeting, I found myself walking back through the same building, only this time the atmosphere was different. Doors opened automatically, lights seemed brighter, and people acknowledged me by name without hesitation. The person who had joked the first night offered a small nod as I passed, barely audible, but it carried a hint of recognition. I returned a polite nod and kept moving. There was no need for acknowledgement beyond that. The work had already spoken. Later that week, another invitation arrived, a smaller, high-level discussion about a related project. I arrived early, not because I wanted to, but to observe. The room felt entirely different from the first night. There was focus, intent, and a quiet energy that made every word count. I noticed people positioning themselves closer to the front. Even those who had ignored me initially seemed to seek insight. The moderator, who had previously stumbled over my presence, greeted me firmly, no hesitation. This was no longer an event to test assumptions. It was a meeting to act on results. As the discussion began, questions came rapidly, many referencing points I had made in prior documents. My recommendations were now the framework everyone relied on. I corrected minor misunderstandings and clarified key dependencies. Every answer shifted the direction of decisions immediately. No applause, no acknowledgement, just precision and effect. One person, a senior member who had laughed at the first presentation, asked for clarification on a specific metric. I explained the methodology step by step. Others listened intently, scribbling notes. The shift was palpable. For the first time, I realized my role had evolved from outsider to essential. Midway, a complication arose. A conflict between two departments threatened to stall progress. Both were referencing different data sources, each insisting their interpretation was correct. The tension in the room rose slightly. I spoke up, presenting an analysis that reconciled both datasets. The disagreement dissolved quickly.